The dust from the stagecoach wheels hadn't even settled when Sarah Zimmerman realized that her carefully planned journey west was about to fall apart before it even began. She stood in front of the stagecoach depot in Albuquerque, New Mexico territory, on a sweltering afternoon in July of 1878, clutching her travel papers and the small carpet bag that held everything she owned. The station manager, a portly man with sweat stains darkening his shirt, looked at her with barely concealed impatience as she tried to understand what he was telling her. "I said there ain't no seat for you, miss," he repeated, louder this time as if volume would make the rejection easier to swallow. "We're full up." "But I have a ticket," Sarah said, holding out the paper with a trembling hand. "I purchased it 3 weeks ago. I have the receipt right here." The manager barely glanced at it. "Don't matter what you got. Stage is full. Can't fit another soul in there." Sarah looked past him to the stagecoach sitting in the afternoon sun. Through the open door, she could clearly see that one of the bench seats was entirely empty. Her chest tightened with a familiar feeling, one she had hoped to leave behind when she fled Boston. The manager followed her gaze and his jaw set in a hard line. "That seat's reserved," he said flatly. "For whom?" "For whoever I say it's for." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah had heard that same tone before, seen that same look. It was the look that said her money wasn't good enough, that she wasn't good enough, that the color of her skin and the curl of her dark hair marked her as something less than the other passengers waiting in the shade of the depot. Her grandmother had been Mexican, her mother half, and though Sarah's own skin was lighter than theirs had been, it was still enough to mark her as different in a world that drew hard lines between people. In Boston, she had been exotic. Here in the territories, she was simply unwanted. "I need to get to Santa Fe," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My brother is expecting me. He has a position waiting for me at his mercantile. Then I suggest you wait for the next stage. Might be one coming through in a week or so." A week. Sarah did the calculation in her head. She had exactly $17 left to her name. A week in Albuquerque would eat through most of that, leaving her nothing to live on when she finally reached Santa Fe. And that was assuming there would even be a seat for her on the next stage, assuming this same man wouldn't find another excuse to refuse her. "Please," she said, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to stop it. "I have nowhere else to go." The manager turned away from her, dismissing her as thoroughly as if she had ceased to exist. Sarah stood there for a long moment, feeling the afternoon heat pressing down on her shoulders, feeling the weight of every decision that had led her to this moment. She thought of her mother's grave in Boston, of the boarding house where she had worked until the new owner had made it clear that her services were no longer required, of the long train journey that had brought her this far west on nothing but hope and her brother's promise of a new start. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. Sarah turned to find a man stepping out of the shade of the depot's overhang. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that touched his collar. His clothes marked him as a working man, a cowboy probably, with worn leather chaps over dusty trousers and a hat that had seen better days. But his eyes were kind, a surprising shade of green that seemed to see more than most people bothered to look for. "I couldn't help but overhear," the man said, addressing the station manager. "Seems like the lady has a ticket and you have an empty seat." The manager's expression shifted to something more cautious. "This ain't your concern, Donovan." "Maybe not," the man said agreeably. "But I've got a seat on that stage and I'm thinking maybe I don't need it after all. You paid good money for that ticket. My money to waste if I choose." The man turned to Sarah, and she saw that his face was lean and weathered by sun and wind, probably somewhere in his late 20s. "Madam, if you need to get to Santa Fe, you can have my seat. I've got a horse. I can ride alongside just as easy." Sarah stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. No one did things like this, not for strangers, not without expecting something in return. "I couldn't possibly accept." "Why not?" "Seat's already paid for. Be ashamed to let it go to waste." He looked back at the manager. "You got any objection to the lady taking my place?" The manager's face had gone red. "That ain't how it works, Donovan." "Seems to me it works however we say it works. My ticket, my choice." "Unless you're saying you're going to refuse to honor a ticket that's already been purchased." There was something in the cowboy's tone, something quiet but unmistakably firm, that made the manager back down. He muttered something under his breath about fools and their money, but he jerked his head toward the stagecoach. "Fine, but I ain't refunding nothing." "Wouldn't dream of asking," the man said. He turned back to Sarah and touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, your seat awaits." Sarah found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Why would you do this?" The man's expression didn't change, but something softened in his eyes. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because my mama would tan my hide if she knew I let a lady get left behind when I could help. And because I've been on the wrong end of someone's judgment enough times to know how it feels." He held out his hand. "Donovan Zeller. Most people call me Donnie." Sarah hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked with his body. "Sarah Zimmerman." "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Zimmerman. Now, we best get you loaded up before the driver decides to leave without us." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Donovan retrieved her carpetbag before she could protest and carried it to the stagecoach himself. The other passengers, two merchants and a gray-haired woman who looked like someone's stern grandmother, watched with varying degrees of curiosity and disapproval as Sarah climbed aboard. She took the seat by the window, the one that had supposedly been reserved, and tried not to meet anyone's eyes. Through the window, she watched Donovan walk to where a buckskin mare was tied at the hitching post. The horse raised her head as he approached, clearly recognizing him, and he stroked her neck with obvious affection before untying the reins. He swung into the saddle with easy grace, settling in as naturally as most men sat in a chair. The stage driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, called out that they were leaving. The coach lurched forward with a crack of the whip, and Sarah gripped the edge of her seat as they rolled out of Albuquerque. She looked out the window and saw Donovan riding alongside, keeping pace with the stage on his buckskin mare. When he caught her looking, he touched his hat brim again, and despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. The road to Santa Fe was rough, carved through desert landscape that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. Sarah had thought Boston's winters were harsh, but the desert heat was something else entirely, a dry, relentless force that seemed to sap the moisture from her very bones. The inside of the stagecoach was stifling, and the constant jolting over ruts and rocks made it impossible to relax. The merchants, who introduced themselves as Mr. Howell and Mr. Green, spent the first hour of the journey discussing business in voices that suggested they wanted everyone to know how successful they were. The older woman, Mrs. Patterson, sat ramrod straight and stared out the opposite window, occasionally dabbing at her forehead with a lace handkerchief. It was Mrs. Patterson who finally broke the awkward silence by addressing Sarah directly. "You have family in Santa Fe?" Sarah nodded, grateful for any conversation that didn't involve hostile silence. "My brother, he owns a mercantile there." "Is your brother Mexican?" Mrs. Patterson asked, and though her tone was neutral, the question itself carried weight. "Our grandmother was," Sarah said, lifting her chin slightly. "My mother was half Mexican, half Irish. My father was from England. Mrs. Patterson considered this for a moment, then nodded. I see. And what happened to your parents? They died. My father when I was young, my mother just this past spring. I'm sorry for your loss. And surprisingly, Mrs. Patterson sounded like she meant it. It's hard losing your mother. I lost mine when I was about your age. How old are you, dear? 22. Young to be traveling alone. But I suppose needs must. At least you have your brother waiting for you. Mrs. Patterson glanced out the window toward where Donovan was riding. That was quite chivalrous, what that cowboy did back in Albuquerque. Yes, Sarah said softly, it was. Donovan Zeller is a good man, Mrs. Patterson said, surprising Sarah. I've known his family for years. His father has a ranch about 20 miles north of Santa Fe. Donnie's been working there since he was old enough to sit a horse. You know him, known him since he was a boy. He and his brothers used to get into all sorts of mischief in town. But even then, Donnie had a good heart. He once gave his Christmas money to a family whose house had burned down. Couldn't have been more than 10 years old at the time. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with memory. His mother, Sarah, would be proud of what he did today. She always taught her boys to stand up for what's right. The coincidence of the shared name made Sarah feel an odd kinship with Donovan's mother, though she had never met the woman. She looked out the window again, watching him ride. He sat easily in the saddle, moving with his horse rather than against her, and even from inside the coach she could see how he scanned the landscape constantly, alert to everything around them. The miles rolled past slowly. They stopped once at a way station to water the horses and let the passengers stretch their legs. Sarah climbed down from the coach, grateful for the chance to move, and found Donovan giving his mare water from his hat. "How are you holding up?" he asked when he saw her approaching. "Well enough, thank you, though I feel terrible that you're riding in this heat because of me." He shrugged, settling his damp hat back on his head. "I've ridden in worse. Besides, Daisy here prefers the open air to being tied behind a stage." He patted the mare's neck. "Don't you, girl?" The horse nickered softly, and Donovan's face lit with a genuine smile that made him look younger. Sarah found herself smiling back. "I still don't understand why you did it," she said. "Gave up your seat, I mean." Donovan was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on Daisy's neck. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My best friend growing up was a boy named Miguel. His family had been in New Mexico for generations, long before it was American territory, but that didn't matter to some folks. They treated him like he didn't belong, like he was less than. I saw what it did to him, carrying that weight around." He met her eyes. "I couldn't stand by and watch someone do that to you, not when I could do something about it." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. "Your mother raised you well." "She did her best. She passed 2 years ago, cancer. I'm sorry." "Me too." He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to shake off the sadness. "Your brother, the one you're going to meet in Santa Fe, what's his name? Samuel. He's 10 years older than me. He left Boston when I was 12 to seek his fortune out west. He's done well for himself, or so his letters say. Well enough that he could send me money for the journey when I wrote to tell him about Mama." "You'll like Santa Fe," Donovan said. "It's a good town, growing fast. Lots of opportunity for those willing to work for it." The stage driver called that they were moving out. Sarah started back toward the coach, then paused and turned back to Donovan. "Thank you. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. What you did was truly kind." His green eyes held hers for a moment. "You're welcome, Miss Zimmerman. Now you best get back on board before they leave without you." As the stagecoach rolled on through the afternoon, Sarah found her attention continually drawn to the window, to the figure riding alongside. Donovan never seemed to tire, never fell behind. Once, when they passed through a particularly narrow canyon, she saw him pull ahead of the stage, his hand resting on something at his hip. It was only when they emerged back into open desert that she realized he had been checking for danger, making sure the way was clear. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon when the stage driver called out a warning. Sarah couldn't make out the words over the rattle of the wheels, but she felt the coach suddenly pick up speed. She gripped her seat as they bounced over the rough road, and outside she could see Donovan urging his mare to keep pace. Mr. Howell leaned out the window, then pulled back quickly, his face pale. "Riders coming up behind us, coming fast." Mrs. Patterson's hand went to her throat. "Bandits? I don't know, but they don't look friendly." Sarah's heart began to pound. She had heard stories about bandits and outlaws who preyed on stagecoaches, but she had told herself those were exaggerations meant to frighten greenhorns. Now, watching Donovan drop back to position himself between the coach and whatever was coming, she realized the stories had been true. The pursuing riders came into view, 3 men on horseback pushing their mounts hard. Sarah couldn't make out their faces, but she could see the dust cloud they raised and hear their whoops carrying across the desert. The stage driver cracked his whip, urging his team faster, but the coach was heavy and the road was rough. Donovan had fallen back now, putting himself directly in the path of the pursuing riders. Sarah watched in horror as he pulled his horse to a stop, right in the middle of the road, blocking the way. The 3 riders slowed, spreading out as they approached him. "What's he doing?" Mr. Green asked, his voice tight with fear. "He'll get himself killed." Sarah couldn't answer. She could only watch as Donovan sat calmly on his horse, facing down 3 men. The stagecoach continued racing forward, putting distance between them and the confrontation, but Sarah kept her eyes on Donovan until the dust and distance made it impossible to see what was happening. "Driver," she called out, "we have to stop, we can't just leave him." But the driver didn't slow. If anything, the stage went faster. Sarah looked at the other passengers, seeing her own fear reflected in their faces, but no one moved to help, even Mrs. Patterson, who had spoken so kindly of Donovan, sat frozen in her seat. "Please," Sarah said, "we have to do something." "There's nothing we can do," Mr. Howell said, though he looked ashamed. "Those men had guns. What could we do against guns?" The coach rattled on for another mile before the driver finally slowed to a more reasonable pace. The landscape had changed, becoming more rolling hills than flat desert, and ahead Sarah could see mountains rising purple in the distance. Santa Fe, she knew, was nestled in those foothills. But she couldn't feel any joy at being close to her destination. All she could think about was Donovan, alone on that road, facing down 3 armed men. She thought of his kindness at the depot, of the way he had given up his seat without hesitation, of how he had ridden alongside all day in the heat to make sure she reached Santa Fe safely. And now he might be hurt or worse, and it was because of her. "We should go back," she said, her voice stronger now. "We should check on him." "Absolutely not," Mr. Green said firmly. "We were lucky to get away. Going back would be suicide." Mrs. Patterson reached across and patted Sarah's hand, but there was defeat in her eyes. "The boy knew what he was doing, dear. He chose to face those men. We have to trust that he can take care of himself." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to demand that they turn around, but she could see it would be useless. These people, safe in their coach, had already written Donovan off as a casualty of frontier life. They would reach Santa Fe, tell their story of a brave cowboy who had sacrificed himself for strangers, and then go on with their lives as if he had never existed. But Sarah couldn't do that. Even though she had only met Donovan that afternoon, even though she barely knew him, she couldn't just forget him. He had shown her more kindness in a few hours than most people had shown her in a lifetime. He had seen her as a person, worthy of respect and help, when others had seen only something to be dismissed or excluded. The sun was setting by the time they finally rolled into Santa Fe. The town was larger than Sarah had expected, with adobe buildings crowded along narrow streets and the smell of cooking fires mixing with dust and horses. The stagecoach pulled up in front of a depot similar to the one in Albuquerque, and passengers began to disembark. Sarah climbed down on shaky legs, her carpetbag clutched in her hand. She looked around at the unfamiliar streets, trying to remember the address her brother had given her in his letter. The Mercantile was on San Francisco Street, he had written. But in the gathering dusk, every street looked the same. Miss Zimmerman. She turned to find a man approaching, tall and thin with brown hair going gray at the temples. His face was familiar in the way that family faces are, similar enough to her own that she knew him even though she hadn't seen him in 10 years. Samuel, her brother smiled, and suddenly he was hugging her, and Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I got your telegram from Albuquerque," Samuel said. "I've been watching for the stage all afternoon. Thank God you're here safely." Sarah returned his hug, but her mind was still on the road behind them, on a cowboy facing down 3 riders. "Samuel, there was a man. He helped me. But there were bandits on the road and he stayed back to stop them and we just left him there." Samuel pulled back, his expression concerned. "What man? What are you talking about?" The story came tumbling out, and Samuel's face grew more serious as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Donovan Zeller," he said finally. "I know the family, good people. His father's ranch is one of our suppliers." He glanced at the darkening sky. "It's too late to do anything tonight. But in the morning I'll send word to the ranch, let them know what happened. They'll want to search for him." "I want to help search," Sarah said immediately. Samuel frowned. "Sarah, you just arrived. You're exhausted from traveling, and besides, searching is work for men who know the territory." "He helped me, Samuel. The station manager in Albuquerque was going to leave me behind, and Donovan gave me his seat. He didn't have to do that. He could have just ridden past and ignored the whole situation, but he didn't. And then, when those riders came after the stage, he put himself between them and us. He might be hurt because of me." "It's not because of you," Samuel said gently. "If those were bandits, they would have gone after the stage regardless, but I understand you feel responsible. Come on, let me take you to my home. You can meet my wife, get some rest, and in the morning we'll figure out what to do." Sarah allowed herself to be led through the streets to a modest but well-maintained house near the center of town. Samuel's wife, Clara, was a plump, cheerful woman who immediately took Sarah under her wing, showing her to a small bedroom and bringing her water to wash with, and a simple meal of beans and cornbread. But despite her exhaustion, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of a new town, and thought about Donovan. She imagined him hurt, alone in the desert, his horse standing vigil over him. She imagined worse things too, things she tried to push away but couldn't quite manage. In the morning, Samuel was true to his word. As soon as the sun was up, he sent a message to the Zeller ranch. Then he took Sarah to see his mercantile, a spacious store filled with everything from dry goods to farm equipment. It was clear he had done well for himself, and Sarah was proud of him even as her mind remained elsewhere. She was helping Clara arrange a display of fabric bolts when the bell over the door rang and Mrs. Patterson walked in. The older woman's face lit with recognition. "Miss Zimmerman. I was hoping I might find you here. I asked around about your brother's store." She glanced at Samuel, then back to Sarah. "I wanted to apologize. For yesterday on the stage, We should have gone back for that young man. I've been sick about it all night. Have you heard anything?" Sarah asked hopefully. "About Donovan," Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "Nothing yet, but I did learn something interesting. Those riders who were chasing us. They weren't bandits at all. They were ranch hands from one of the spreads south of Albuquerque. Apparently they had been in town celebrating a birthday and were racing each other home, drunk as skunks. They didn't even realize they'd scared the stagecoach until they sobered up this morning." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. "So they weren't trying to rob us?" "No, dear. Just drunk fools acting like idiots. I heard they were quite embarrassed when they realized what they'd done." "But that means your cowboy friend probably wasn't hurt at all. He most likely just talked to them and realized they weren't a threat." It was the best news Sarah had heard since arriving in Santa Fe. If the riders hadn't been bandits, then Donovan was probably fine. He had probably just waited to make sure they weren't coming back, then continued on his way home. But the morning passed with no word, and then the afternoon. Sarah tried to keep busy in the store, learning where things were kept and how Samuel liked things organized. Clara was patient and kind, and Sarah could see why her brother had chosen this woman to be his wife. But her attention kept drifting to the door, hoping to see Donovan walk through it. It was nearly evening when the bell finally rang, and a man entered. He was older than Donovan, probably in his 40s, with the same lean build and similar green eyes. His expression was serious as he approached the counter where Samuel was working. "I'm Daniel Zeller," the man said. "I got your message about my son." Samuel came around the counter, his face concerned. "Mr. Zeller, I'm Samuel Zimmerman. I sent that message. Have you heard from Donovan?" "No." The single word carried a weight of worry. "He didn't come home last night. His mother is beside herself. I've got men out searching the road between here and Albuquerque, but so far there's been no sign of him." Sarah stepped forward before she could think better of it. "I'm Sarah Zimmerman, Samuel's sister. I was on the stagecoach yesterday. Your son gave me his seat and rode alongside instead." Daniel Zeller looked at her and she saw no judgment in his eyes, only concern. "So I heard. That sounds like my boy always helping someone. Did you see what happened when those riders approached?" Sarah shook her head miserably. "The stage kept going. We left him behind. I wanted to go back, but no one would listen to me." "It's not your fault, miss." But Daniel's face was drawn with worry. "I need to keep searching. I just came by to see if you might remember anything that could help, anything at all about where exactly this happened." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember. "There was a canyon, narrow with red rock walls. We had just come through it when the riders appeared, and then when the stage sped up, the landscape changed to more rolling hills. There were some large rocks on the left side of the road, shaped almost like mushrooms." "Hoodoos," Daniel said, nodding. "I know the place. That's about 10 miles south of here." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Sarah. "Thank you for the information, Miss Zimmerman. And thank you for caring what happened to my son." After he left, Sarah stood still for a long moment, feeling helpless and frustrated. Finally, she turned to her brother. "I'm going with him. Sarah, you can't just go riding off into the desert. You don't know the land, you don't have a horse, and it'll be dark soon." "Then I'll wait until morning." "But I'm going, Samuel. I have to." Her brother studied her face, and something in her expression must have convinced him because he sighed. "You're as stubborn as Mama was." "All right, I'll take you myself in the morning. But we're waiting until full light and we're taking supplies. If we're going to search, we're going to do it smart." Sarah agreed, though it meant another sleepless night worrying. She lay in bed imagining all the things that could have happened to Donovan. Maybe his horse had thrown a shoe and they were walking back slowly. Maybe he had taken a different route home. Maybe he had been hurt after all. despite what Mrs. Patterson had learned about the riders. In the morning, Samuel hitched a horse to a small wagon and loaded it with water, food, blankets, and a rifle. Sarah climbed up beside him, and they set out south along the road to Albuquerque. They passed Daniel Zeller and several other men also searching, and Samuel stopped to coordinate with them, dividing up sections of the territory to cover. The sun was climbing higher when they reached the area Sarah had described, with the hoodoos standing like sentinels beside the road. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop and they both climbed down to search on foot. "Donovan," Sarah called, cupping her hands around her mouth. "Donovan Zeller." Only the wind answered, carrying her voice away across the desert. They searched the road, looking for any sign of what might have happened. It was Samuel who found the tracks, boot prints leading off the road toward a cluster of rocks about 100 yards away. "Someone went this way," he said. "Recently, too. These prints haven't been worn away by wind yet." They followed the tracks, moving carefully over the rocky ground. As they rounded a large boulder, Sarah saw a flash of brown that made her heart leap. Daisy, Donovan's buckskin mare, was standing in the shade of the rocks, still saddled, and slumped against the base of the boulder, his hat pulled low over his face, was Donovan himself. Sarah ran forward, her heart pounding. "Donovan!" He stirred at the sound of his name, pushing his hat back. His face was pale and drawn, and she could see now that his left leg was splinted with sticks and strips torn from his shirt. "Miss Zimmerman." His voice was rough, probably from thirst. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you," Sarah said, dropping to her knees beside him. "We've been searching since yesterday. Your father is out here somewhere looking too." "What happened?" Donovan managed a weak smile. "After those riders passed and I saw they were just drunk cowboys, I started to catch up with the stage. But it was getting dark, and Daisy here stepped in a prairie dog hole. Threw me pretty good. Landed wrong and broke my leg." Samuel had already gone back to the wagon and was returning with water and supplies. He knelt on Donovan's other side, carefully examining the makeshift splint. "You did good work splinting this yourself. How long have you been here?" "Since last night." "Figured someone would come looking eventually, either from the ranch or from town. Didn't expect it to be you folks, though." He took the water Samuel offered and drank gratefully. "Your father is searching too," Sarah said. "We need to signal him, let him know we found you." Samuel fired his rifle 3 times in the air, the agreed-upon signal that someone had been found. Within 20 minutes, Daniel Zeller and 2 of his ranch hands arrived. The relief on the older man's face when he saw his son was profound. "You scared 10 years off your mother's life," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "And mine too, if I'm being honest. Sorry, Pa, wasn't exactly planned." Donovan winced as they carefully moved him onto a blanket to carry him to the wagon. "Daisy okay?" "The horse is fine," one of the ranch hands reported after examining her. "Just tired and thirsty. No permanent damage." They loaded Donovan into Samuel's wagon, making him as comfortable as possible with blankets. Daniel insisted on riding back to town with them, while his ranch hands took Daisy and headed toward the Zeller ranch to let Donovan's mother know he had been found. The ride back to Santa Fe was slow, Samuel taking care to avoid the worst ruts in the road. Sarah sat in the back of the wagon with Donovan, using her rolled-up shawl to cushion his head from the worst of the jolting. "You shouldn't have come looking for me," Donovan said, but there was no real conviction in his voice. "Of course I should have," Sarah replied. "You gave up your seat for me. The least I could do was help search for you when you went missing. That was different." "How?" "Because you needed help." "And you didn't." He was quiet for a moment, then gave a soft laugh that turned into a wince. "Point taken, Miss Zimmerman." "Sarah," she said, I think after all this you can call me Sarah. Then you should call me Donnie. All my friends do. Are we friends then? He met her eyes, and despite his obvious pain, his smile was genuine. I'd like to think so, yes. In Santa Fe, they took Donovan to the doctor, who examined his leg and pronounced the makeshift splint adequate. The break was clean, the doctor said, and would heal well with proper rest. He removed Donovan's improvised splint and replaced it with a proper plaster cast, then gave strict orders that the leg was not to bear weight for at least 6 weeks. Daniel insisted on taking his son home to the ranch to recuperate, but Donovan shook his head firmly. Pa, I love Ma, but if I go home she'll hover over me every minute. I'll go crazy inside of a week. Besides, you need every able-bodied man you've got for the cattle drive next month. You can't spare someone to play nursemaid to me. Then what do you propose? Daniel asked. I'll stay in town. I can get a room at the boarding house and I'll stay off my leg like the doctor said. But Samuel interrupted. Nonsense. We have a spare room at our house. You can stay with us. Clara's a fine cook and we're right next to the store, so there's always someone around if you need help. Donovan looked uncomfortable with the offer. That's mighty generous, but I couldn't impose like that. It's not imposing, Sarah said quickly. You helped me when I needed it. Now we're helping you. That's what friends do. She emphasized the last word, and Donovan's expression softened. He looked at his father, who was nodding in agreement. The Zimmermans are good people, son. If they are offering, I'd take them up on it, at least until you can get around better on your own. So it was decided. Daniel went back to the ranch to reassure Donovan's mother and handle the cattle drive preparations, while Donovan settled into the spare room at Samuel and Clara's house. It was the same room Sarah had been given when she first arrived, but she happily moved to the smaller room that had been serving as Clara's sewing space. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Sarah helped in the mercantile during the day, learning the business and meeting the regular customers. In the evenings, she would bring Donovan his dinner and stay to talk, sharing stories about their very different lives. She learned that he was 27, the middle of 3 brothers. His older brother John helped run the family ranch, while his younger brother had gone east to study law. Donovan had always loved the ranch life, loved working with horses and cattle, loved the wide open spaces of New Mexico. Never wanted to be anywhere else, he said one evening as they sat on the small porch behind the house. His broken leg was propped up on a crate, and Sarah sat in the chair beside him, mending one of Samuel's shirts. I know some folks dream of going to big cities, seeing the world. But everything I need is right here. I thought I needed the big city, Sarah admitted. Boston felt safe, familiar. But after Mama died and I lost my job, I realized there was nothing keeping me there. No real friends, no prospects, just memories, and most of them weren't even that happy. What was it like growing up there? Sarah was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. Complicated. My father died when I was 7, so I barely remember him. My mother worked as a seamstress, and we lived in a small apartment in the North End. It wasn't a wealthy area, but it wasn't the worst either. Mama tried to give me a good education, sent me to a charity school run by nuns. But I was always caught between worlds, too Mexican for some, not Mexican enough for others. Too poor to fit in with society, but educated enough that I didn't quite fit with the working class either. That sounds lonely. It was, sometimes. She smiled at him. But I had books and my mother, and the dream that someday things would be different. Are they different? Now that you're here, I don't know yet. It's only been a few days, but I think maybe they could be. Santa Fe feels like a place where different kinds of people can coexist, where the lines aren't quite so rigid. The lines are still there, Donovan said quietly. Don't mistake that. But yeah, Maybe they're a bit softer here. Or at least, there are more lines, so folks are too busy keeping track of them all to enforce them as strictly. It was an astute observation, and Sarah found herself impressed by his understanding. For someone who had spent his whole life in New Mexico, he had a clear-eyed view of how society worked. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself spending more and more time with Donovan. She would finish her work at the mercantile and hurry home to have dinner with him. They would sit on the porch in the evening cool and talk about everything and nothing. He told her about the ranch, about breaking horses and rounding up cattle, about sleeping under the stars during long drives. She told him about Boston, about the ocean that she missed more than she expected to, about the books she had read and the dreams she had harbored. Clara noticed, of course. One afternoon, while they were working together in the store, she casually mentioned that Donovan seemed to be recovering well. "He's healing nicely," Sarah agreed, trying to sound neutral, "and you've been very attentive in helping with his recovery." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "He gave up his seat for me on the stage. I'm just returning the kindness." "Of course." Clara's smile was knowing. "And the fact that he's a handsome young man with a good heart and a steady future has nothing to do with how much time you spend sitting with him on the porch." Clara, her sister-in-law, laughed. "Oh, don't be embarrassed. It's sweet. And from what I can see, he enjoys your company just as much as you enjoy his." Sarah wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. The truth was, she looked forward to those evening conversations more than anything else in her day. She loved the way Donovan listened when she talked, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. She loved his dry sense of humor, the way he could make her laugh with a wry observation. She loved how he saw past the surface of things to what lay beneath. And if she was being honest with herself, she loved other things too. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, deep and genuine, the way he looked at her sometimes like she was something precious and rare. But she didn't know if it was appropriate to feel these things, this attraction to a man she had only known for a few weeks. They came from such different worlds. He was a rancher's son, born and raised in New Mexico, as much a part of this landscape as the mountains themselves. She was a city girl, an outsider still learning the ways of this place. It was Donovan who finally brought up the subject, about 3 weeks after the accident. His cast was due to come off in another 3 weeks, and they both knew that once he could walk again, he would return to the ranch. Their time together was finite, and perhaps that knowledge made him brave. "Sarah," he said one evening after they had been sitting in comfortable silence for a while, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about what comes next, after I'm healed and back at the ranch?" Sarah's hand stilled on the sewing in her lap. "Sometimes." "What do you think about?" She took a breath, deciding to be honest. "I think about how much I'll miss these conversations, how the evenings will seem empty without someone to share them with." Donovan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was testing uncertain ground. "It doesn't have to end. The conversations, I mean. The ranch isn't that far from town. I could visit. Or you could come out to see the place. My ma would love to meet you, especially after everything you did to help find me." "I'd like that," Sarah said softly. "Very much." He reached over and took her hand, and the simple touch sent warmth spreading through her chest. His hand was rough and calloused, the hand of a working man, but his touch was gentle. "Sarah, I know we haven't known each other long. And I know I've got no right to ask anything of you when you just got here and are still settling in. But I want you to know that these weeks with you have been the best I can remember in a long time. You're smart and kind and funny, and when I'm with you, everything just feels right." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Donnie, I feel the same way, but I don't know if it's real or if it's just because we've been spending so much time together while you recover. How can we know if what we feel will last once things go back to normal?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I want to find out. Don't you?" She met his eyes, saw the hope and uncertainty there, and realized that he was just as nervous about this as she was. This strong, capable man who had faced down what he thought were bandits without flinching was afraid of what her answer might be. "Yes," she said. "I want to find out." He smiled then, the kind of smile that lit up his whole face, and he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. It was old-fashioned and courtly, and it made Sarah feel like she was the heroine in one of the romance novels she used to sneak from the library. After that evening, something shifted between them. There was an understanding now, an acknowledgement of the feelings growing between them. Samuel and Clara were clearly aware of the developing romance, but neither of them seemed opposed to it. Samuel had made inquiries about the Zeller family and reported back that they were well respected and financially stable. But more importantly, Clara said, Donovan himself is a good man. That matters more than anything else. When the cast finally came off, the doctor pronounced Donovan healed enough to bear weight carefully. He still needed a cane for support, but he could walk, and that meant he could return to helping at the ranch. The morning he was set to leave, Sarah helped him pack his few belongings. He had been wearing borrowed clothes from Samuel during his stay, but his own things had been brought from the ranch and laundered. She folded his shirts carefully, taking perhaps more time than necessary. "You'll visit?" she asked, not quite meeting his eyes. "Just try to keep me away." He took the shirt from her hands and set it aside, then gently tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "Sarah, I meant what I said. These weeks with you, they've meant everything to me. I'm not going to let this end just because I'm heading back to the ranch. It's different when you're not here every day. Life gets busy, things change. Then we'll make sure they change in the right direction." He hesitated, then added, "Come with me today. Come see the ranch, meet my family. I want them to know you, and I want you to see the place that's such a big part of my life." Sarah had been nervous about meeting Donovan's family, worried about how they might receive her. But his invitation was so sincere, his desire to include her in his world so clear, that she found herself agreeing. Samuel lent them a small buggy, and Donovan drove with Sarah beside him. The ride north out of Santa Fe was beautiful, the landscape opening up into rolling grassland backed by mountains. The Zeller ranch, when they reached it, was larger than Sarah had expected. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a wide porch and flowers growing in pots along the rail. Corrals and outbuildings spread out behind it, and in the distance, Sarah could see cattle grazing. Donovan's mother came out to meet them before they had even climbed down from the buggy. She was a handsome woman in her early 50s, with graying brown hair and the same green eyes as her son. Her face was lined from sun and hard work, but her smile was warm. "Donovan," she embraced her son carefully, mindful of his still healing leg. "It's good to have you home, and this must be Miss Zimmerman. Please call me Sarah." "Sarah then, I'm Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie." She studied Sarah for a moment, and Sarah held her breath, waiting for judgment. But Maggie just smiled. "Thank you for helping search for my boy, and for taking care of him while he was laid up. Daniel told me how kind you and your family were." The tension in Sarah's shoulders eased. "He helped me first. I was only returning the favor." Still, not everyone would have bothered. Maggie turned toward the house. "Come inside. I've got coffee on, and I want to hear all about how Donnie's been recovering. The letters I got were frustratingly short on details." The inside of the house was comfortable and well lived in, with sturdy furniture and colorful woven rugs on the floors. Maggie led them to the kitchen, a large sunny room that clearly served as the heart of the home. She poured coffee and set out fresh biscuits, then sat down to hear the story of Donovan's recovery. As they talked, other members of the family filtered in. Daniel came from the barns, followed by John, the older brother who looked like a bigger version of Donovan. They were welcoming, treating Sarah like she belonged there rather than an outsider intruding on family time. After coffee, Donovan insisted on showing Sarah around the ranch despite his mother's protests that he should be resting. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, but he was clearly proud of the place and wanted Sarah to see it. "We run about 300 head of cattle," he explained as they looked out over the nearest pasture. "Mostly we sell to the army forts and Indian agencies. It's steady work, reliable income. We also break and train horses. That's what I spend most of my time on." "Is it dangerous?" he grinned. "Can be, but I'm good at it. Got away with horses, or so folks tell me." They walked to one of the corrals where several young horses were penned. Donovan called softly and a young bay mare trotted over, ears forward with curiosity. He scratched her forehead and the horse leaned into his touch. "This is Juniper," he said. "I've been working with her since she was a foal. She's smart, learns quick. Another few months and she'll be ready to sell, though I'll hate to see her go." Sarah could hear the affection in his voice, see the gentle way he handled the horse. This was Donovan in his element, doing what he loved, and it made her heart ache with something she couldn't quite name. They stayed for lunch, and over the meal, Sarah got to know the family better. John's wife was visiting her parents in Taos, but their 3 children were there, energetic boys who regarded their Uncle Donnie with obvious hero worship. Maggie asked Sarah about her life in Boston, about her journey west, about her plans for the future. "I'm learning the mercantile business," Sarah said. "Samuel thinks I have a head for numbers and I enjoy working with the customers. It's nice to feel useful." "A woman needs meaningful work," Maggie agreed. "I've never understood the notion that females should just sit around looking decorative. There's too much to do in this life to waste time being idle." It was clear where Donovan had gotten his progressive attitudes. Sarah found herself liking his mother more with each passing minute. On the ride back to Santa Fe, Donovan was quiet for a while. Finally, he said, "So what did you think? Your family is wonderful. Your mother is amazing. She liked you too, I could tell." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "Sarah, I know this is all happening fast. We've only known each other a month, but I can't help how I feel. Every day I'm more certain that you're someone special, someone I don't want to let slip away." Sarah's heart was full to bursting. "I feel the same way, Donnie. It scares me a little how strong these feelings are, but I don't want to fight them anymore." When they reached Samuel's house, Donovan helped her down from the buggy. Before she could turn away, he caught her hand and pulled her back. There, in the street with anyone who cared to look watching, he kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when he pulled back, Sarah felt like she was glowing. "I'll be back in a few days," he said, "and then a few days after that. And I'll keep coming back as often as I can until you get tired of seeing me." "That might never happen," Sarah said, and his answering smile was like sunshine. Over the next several months, they fell into a pattern. Donovan would come to town once or twice a week, timing his visits around the ranch work. Sometimes, Sarah would ride out to visit the ranch, and Maggie always welcomed her warmly. They went on long walks together when Donovan's leg allowed, exploring the hills around Santa Fe. They talked about everything, from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Sarah bloomed under the attention. She had never felt so seen, so valued, as she did with Donovan. He encouraged her ideas, listened to her opinions, treated her as an equal partner in their conversations. With him, She didn't have to hide parts of herself or pretend to be someone she wasn't. The town noticed, of course. Some people whispered, questioning whether it was appropriate for the Mexican seamstress's daughter to be courting the son of a prosperous rancher. But enough people had heard the story of how Donovan had given up his seat for Sarah, and how she had helped search for him when he was injured. It became a romantic tale, the kind of story people told at parties and gatherings. The disapproval couldn't quite take root in the face of such clear devotion. It was in October, as autumn began to touch the mountains with gold, that Donovan asked her to marry him. They were sitting by a small creek on the ranch land, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had been quieter than usual all afternoon, and Sarah had wondered if something was wrong. "Sarah," he said suddenly, turning to face her, "I've been thinking about something for a while now, and I can't wait any longer to ask." Her heart started to race. "Ask what?" "I love you. I think I've loved you since that day at the depot in Albuquerque, when you stood there refusing to give up even though the world was pushing against you. You're the strongest, most amazing woman I've ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you'll have me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple but beautiful, a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me last week. She said she knew from the moment she met you that you were the one for me. Will you marry me, Sarah? Will you be my wife?" Tears were streaming down Sarah's face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, of course I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her and the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them and the promise of forever. They were married in December, in a small ceremony at the church in Santa Fe. Samuel walked Sarah down the aisle, and Clara cried happy tears. The Zeller family filled several pews, and many of their friends and customers from the mercantile came to celebrate. Even Mrs. Patterson was there, dabbing at her eyes with her lace handkerchief. Sarah wore a dress that Clara had helped her make, simple but elegant in cream-colored silk. Donovan wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and so full of love that it took Sarah's breath away. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, and Donovan kissed her in front of everyone, Sarah felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This man, who had given her his seat when she had nothing, who had seen her worth when others had tried to diminish her, was now her husband. They were starting a new life together, building something that belonged to both of them. They spent their first weeks of marriage at the ranch. Maggie and Daniel had added a wing to the main house, giving the newlyweds their own space while still keeping them close to the family. It was an adjustment, learning to live together, learning the rhythms of married life. But they navigated it with patience and humor, and a deep affection that made even the difficult moments bearable. Sarah learned the ranch work, helping Maggie with the gardens and the chickens, learning to cook the hearty meals that ranch work demanded. She also started a small library in the main house, sharing her love of books with the family. John's boys were eager students, and Sarah found she enjoyed teaching them to read better than they had been managing with their sporadic schooling. Donovan continued his work with the horses, and Sarah loved watching him in the corrals, patient and gentle with even the wildest colts. She saw how the animals responded to him, how they learned to trust him. It reminded her of how he had approached her, with that same patient gentleness, earning her trust one day at a time. In the spring, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled the house with joy. Maggie was thrilled at the prospect of another grandchild, and Donovan was beside himself with excitement and nerves. "What if I'm not a good father?" he asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on Sarah's still flat belly. "You'll be a wonderful father," Sarah assured him. "You're kind and patient and loving. What more could a child need? I want to give them everything. A good home, a good education, a world where they don't have to face the kind of judgment you've faced. We can't control everything, Sarah said gently. But we can give them love and support and teach them to be strong. The rest they'll have to figure out themselves. Their son was born in November, a squalling, healthy baby boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas Daniel, after both his grandfathers. Donovan cried when he held his son for the first time, and Sarah fell even more in love with her husband seeing the tenderness with which he cradled the tiny baby. Motherhood was harder than Sarah had expected, but also more rewarding. Thomas was a demanding baby, fussy and colicky, but when he smiled at her or curled his tiny hand around her finger, everything else melted away. Donovan was an involved father, walking the floor with Thomas at night, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft cowboy songs to soothe his son to sleep. The ranch prospered. Daniel eventually handed over more responsibility to his sons, stepping back to let John and Donovan take the lead. They expanded the horse-breaking operation, which brought in good income. Sarah helped with the books, applying the skills she had learned at the mercantile, and discovered she had a knack for managing the business side of ranching. Thomas grew into a cheerful toddler, always underfoot, fascinated by the horses and cows. By the time he was 3, Sarah was pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born with her father's smile and her mother's determination. They named her Margaret after Donovan's mother, but everyone called her Maggie from the start. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch work was hard but satisfying. Sarah's relationship with Maggie deepened into true friendship. Samuel and Clara visited often, and their children played with Thomas and little Maggie. The Zellers became a fixture in Santa Fe society, respected for their hard work and fair dealings. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Sarah would sit on the porch with Donovan and think back to that day at the depot in Albuquerque. She thought about how close she had come to being left behind, to never meeting this man who had become the center of her world. It seemed impossible now that there had been a time when they didn't know each other, when their lives were separate. "What are you thinking about?" Donovan asked one such evening, reaching over to take her hand. That day at the depot, how different things could have been. "But they weren't," he said, squeezing her fingers. "You needed help and I was there to give it. Some might call that luck, but I think it was something more. I think we were meant to find each other. I think you might be right." He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the sounds of their children playing in the yard, the comfortable noises of the ranch settling down for the evening. This was her life now, so different from anything she could have imagined growing up in Boston. This was home. Years passed, measured in seasons and harvests, in birthdays and holidays. Thomas grew tall and strong, showing his father's way with horses. Maggie was quick and clever, always asking questions, always wanting to learn more. They had 2 more children, another boy and another girl, and the house rang with noise and laughter. Sarah never forgot where she came from or the struggles she had faced. When she encountered prejudice in town, which still happened occasionally despite her position as Mrs. Zeller, she faced it with quiet dignity. She made it a point to help others who were struggling, remembering how Donovan's kindness had changed her life. She and Clara started a charitable organization that helped newcomers to Santa Fe, providing temporary housing and help finding work. Maggie contributed land and resources, and other prominent families joined in. It became one of Sarah's greatest sources of pride, this tangible way of passing on the help she had once received. Donovan supported her work fully, just as she supported his. They built their life together as true partners, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams. It wasn't always easy. They had disagreements and hard times like any couple, but they faced everything together with love and respect and a commitment to their partnership. When Thomas turned 18, he announced that he wanted to study veterinary medicine. It was a relatively new field, but he was passionate about it, and Sarah and Donovan encouraged him to pursue his dreams. He went east to study, writing long letters home about his classes and his experiences. Maggie surprised no one by becoming a teacher. She had always loved learning, and she wanted to share that love with others. She taught at the school in Santa Fe, becoming known for her patience and her ability to reach even the most difficult students. As Sarah and Donovan grew older together, they watched their children build their own lives, make their own choices. Thomas returned from his studies and set up a practice in Santa Fe, becoming the region's first qualified veterinarian. He married a sweet-natured woman named Julia, and they had children of their own. Maggie married a teacher like herself, and they moved to Albuquerque to start a school together. Their other children also found their paths, building lives that made Sarah and Donovan proud. One afternoon in their later years, Sarah and Donovan rode out to the place by the creek where he had proposed all those years ago. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined by time and sun. But Donovan still looked at Sarah with the same love he had shown that first day, and her heart still skipped when he smiled at her. "You ever regret it?" he asked as they sat together, watching the water flow past. "Marrying a cowboy and spending your life on a ranch. I know this wasn't what you expected when you left Boston." Sarah thought about the question seriously. She thought about all the roads her life might have taken, all the different choices she could have made. Then she looked at her husband, this good, kind man who had given her so much more than a seat on a stagecoach. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This life with you has been better than anything I could have dreamed. You gave me more than help that day at the depot. You gave me hope and respect and a future I never imagined possible. You gave me a home and a family and a love that has sustained me through everything. How could I ever regret that?" Donovan's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I'm the one who got lucky that day. I saw you standing there, refusing to back down, and something in my heart just knew. You were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours." "We were both lucky," Sarah said, leaning against his shoulder just as she had done so many times over the years. "Lucky that I needed help, lucky that you were there to give it, lucky that a moment of kindness could grow into a lifetime of love." They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and pink that had lit their engagement all those years ago. Around them, the ranch stretched out, prosperous and peaceful, filled with the fruits of their labor and their love. Sarah thought about writing a letter to Thomas later, or maybe to Maggie, telling them about this afternoon, about the memories and the gratitude. She wanted them to know how a single act of kindness could change everything, how standing up for what was right could lead to blessings beyond measure. But for now, she was content to sit with her husband, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in comfortable rhythm. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but quiet afternoons with the person you loved, looking back on a life well lived and forward to whatever time remained. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For seeing me. For giving me your seat. For loving me. For everything." Donovan brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles just as he had done so many times over the years. "Thank you for saying yes. To the seat, to the courtship, to the proposal. Thank you for building this life with me." They sat together until the stars began to appear, talking softly about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and the town, about all the small details that made up their shared life. And when they finally rode back to the house, they did so side by side, just as they had traveled through all the years of their marriage. The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smells of dinner cooking and the sounds of family. Several of their children had come to visit, and grandchildren ran shrieking through the rooms in some game of their own devising. Maggie, now elderly but still sharp as ever, was directing kitchen operations with the help of Thomas's wife. Sarah stepped into the chaos and felt nothing but contentment. This was her legacy, she thought. Not just the children and grandchildren, though they were precious beyond words, but the love that filled this house, the acceptance and respect and kindness that they all showed each other. These were the values she and Donovan had built their marriage on, and they had passed them down to the next generations. After dinner, when the children had been put to bed and the adults sat around the big kitchen table with coffee, Thomas asked his parents to tell the story of how they met. It was a tale they had heard many times, but they never seemed to tire of it. Donovan looked at Sarah, smiling. "You tell it. You tell it better than I do." So Sarah told the story once again, about the depot in Albuquerque and the seat she was refused and the cowboy who gave up his own. She told about riding in the stagecoach while he rode alongside, about the accident and the search, about falling in love slowly and surely over the weeks of his recovery. "The point is," she said, looking around at her family, "one act of kindness can change everything. Your father didn't have to help me that day. He could have kept his seat and let me figure out my own problems. But he chose kindness, and that choice led to all of this." She gestured around the table. "Every person sitting here exists because of that choice. Every moment of joy we've shared as a family stems from that one decision to do the right thing." "I think about it sometimes," young Maggie said. She was visiting from Albuquerque with her husband and their 2 children. What the world would be like if more people made that choice. If we all looked out for each other instead of just ourselves. "The world would be a better place," Donovan agreed. "But we can't control what everyone else does. We can only control our own actions. And we can teach our children and they can teach theirs, and maybe slowly things will change." It was late when everyone finally headed to bed. Sarah and Donovan walked slowly to their room, moving with the careful deliberation of people whose bodies had been worn by years of hard work. But they were healthy and strong, grateful for every day they had together. As they got ready for bed, Sarah caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was an old woman now, her dark hair mostly gray, her face lined with wrinkles earned through years of laughter and tears, joy and sorrow. But her eyes were still bright, still full of life. She thought about the young woman she had been, standing at that depot with her carpetbag and her fear and her determination. That woman had been so lost, so uncertain about her future. If Sarah could go back and tell her younger self what was coming, all the love and happiness that awaited, would she believe it? Probably not. The young Sarah had been too hurt, too wary of hope. She would have thought it was a trick, too good to be true, but it had all been true. Every wonderful moment of it. Donovan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. They looked at their reflection together, 2 old people who had loved each other for more than 30 years. "Still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he murmured. Sarah laughed softly. "You need spectacles, old man." "My eyes are fine. I see you perfectly. And what I see is the woman I fell in love with, the woman who has made every day of my life better just by being in it." She turned in his arms, looking up at his dear, familiar face. "I love you, Donnie. I have loved you from almost the beginning, and I will love you until the end. And beyond," he said, kissing her gently. "I'll love you beyond the end into whatever comes next." They climbed into bed, and Sarah settled against Donovan's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. It was how they had slept for decades, fitted together like puzzle pieces. "You think it matters?" she asked quietly. "Our story. In the grand scheme of things, do you think it makes any difference?" "It mattered to us," Donovan said. "It mattered to our children and grandchildren, and maybe someone will hear our story and be inspired to show kindness to a stranger, and that kindness will change someone else's life. Maybe that's how we change the world, one small act at a time." Sarah thought about that as she drifted toward sleep. She thought about all the people they had helped over the years, all the small kindnesses they had shown and received. She thought about the charitable organization she and Clara had started, which was still helping newcomers find their feet in Santa Fe. She thought about their children, who had learned compassion and generosity from watching their parents. Maybe Donovan was right. Maybe their love story, which had started with a refused seat and a cowboy's kindness, had rippled outward in ways they couldn't fully measure. Maybe every act of love and kindness did that, spreading out like circles in water, touching lives in ways you could never predict. It was a comforting thought to fall asleep with. Sarah's last conscious awareness was of Donovan's steady heartbeat under her ear, the warmth of his body against hers, and the deep contentment of a life fully lived and a love fully realized. In the morning, she would wake to another day, another chance to show love and kindness to the people around her. But for now, she slept peacefully in her husband's arms, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them together and the life they had built. Their story had started with a simple act of decency at a dusty depot in Albuquerque, New Mexico Territory, in July of 1878. A woman refused a seat, a cowboy who gave up his own and rode alongside. And from that moment, from that choice to see another person's humanity and respond with kindness, had grown a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that would endure for generations. It was, Sarah thought in those last moments before sleep claimed her, the best story she had ever been part of. Better than any book she had ever read, any tale she had ever heard. Because it was real and it was theirs, and it had made all the difference, the end.